She clinked her glass just once. Not to toast, not to celebrate, but to summon the waitress. Across the polished dining room of the Briar and Finch, silverware stilled, conversations paused just for a second, enough for everyone nearby to feel it. That sound, sharp, icy, intentional. At the center of it all sat Vivian Cross, diamond collar, crisp cream blazer, smile like she owned the air in the room. To her left and right, two other women leaned in, giggling over imported wine. But Vivian wasn't laughing. She was watching the young server approach, and she was already sharpening her words. Because in Vivian's world, kindness was optional, but control was everything. What happened next didn't just quiet a room. It changed the tone of an entire evening. And maybe, just maybe, one woman's life. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those. Quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now let's take a closer look at what really happened. The Briar and Finch wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage. A place where reputation ordered before the menu, and old money whispered across mahogany tables under soft chandeliers. It was Thursday night in Charleston. The dinner rush had turned into a performance. Waiters moved like dancers, silent, trained, and careful not to break the rhythm. Behind the bar, champagne flutes lined up like soldiers. And in the far right corner, the owner sat quietly in a gray suit sipping water. Few people noticed him, but he noticed everything. Near the center of the dining room, Vivian Cross occupied the best seat in the house. Her name carried weight in the city, real estate empire, magazine covers, charity balls, and ego. She sat with two friends, Lindsay and Paige, women who had long ago traded sincerity for status. They wore expressions that said, "We've arrived," but still glanced around the room, measuring their audience. Vivian never glanced. She expected to be seen. And tonight, she was. Their server, young, slim, a little too pale, approached with careful steps and a tray of entrees balanced just right. Her name tag read Rachel, barely visible against her dark uniform. She had only been working at the Briar for 3 months, double shifts, saving for nursing school, no time for mistakes. Vivian saw her coming from the corner of her eye and didn't smile. Rachel set the plates down gently. "Here you are, ladies. I hope you enjoy your meals," she said, her voice warm but quiet. Vivian didn't answer right away. She stared at her plate, then raised an eyebrow. "This is medium rare," she asked. Her tone didn't rise, it sliced. Rachel blinked. "It should be, ma'am, but if it looks closer to well done," Vivian interrupted. "And why did it take so long? We've been waiting for, 40 minutes? Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I'll take it back and—" "Oh, spare me the apology," Vivian said, leaning back. Her friends chuckled. "Honestly, it's not that hard to get an order right, or is it?" Rachel flushed. Her cheeks burned as she lifted the plate back onto the tray. "Hands steady, but not by much," she whispered. "I'll have this fixed right away," and turned to walk toward the kitchen. But behind her, Vivian wasn't finished. "Unbelievable," she muttered, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "They'll hire anyone these days, won't they?" Lindsay covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Paige didn't even try. Vivian kept going. "I mean, really, if you can't carry a plate without looking like it weighs 50 pounds, maybe you're in the wrong job." There it was. A silence. That kind of silence. The kind that crawls across the floor and up the walls. That holds people still, not from shock but from shame. A few diners glanced toward the scene. Some lowered their heads. Others shook them, just enough to register disapproval. But no one said a word. In the corner booth, the man in the gray suit set down his glass. He had seen enough, but he didn't move. Not yet. In the kitchen, Rachel stood beside the chef's station, staring at the replacement plate. Her fingers trembled slightly, even as she tried to breathe. She had worked in service before, diners, cafes, weddings. She'd seen rude customers. But something about this, about the way Vivian Cross had spoken, so calmly cruel, cut deeper than usual. She pressed her hand to her chest, steadied her breath, and went back out. Vivian didn't look up when the new dish arrived. Rachel placed it down quietly. "Here you are, ma'am." The chef prepared a fresh cut. "I hope this is to your satisfaction." Vivian picked up her fork. "I suppose it'll do," she said. "Next time, try to get it right the first time. And for heaven's sake, learn how to carry yourself. You represent this establishment. Quite frankly, you're doing a terrible job of it." Rachel nodded once. Her smile was faint. Her voice even fainter. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do my best." As Rachel turned to leave, Vivian smirked and muttered to her friends. "It's amazing, isn't it? How someone can be that incompetent and still think they deserve respect." That was when the man in the gray suit stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even speak to Vivian. He walked to the bar and leaned in toward the manager. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a linen towel over one shoulder. Their exchange was quiet, short, but something shifted in the air, a new current, and this time it was moving in a different direction. Back at her table, Vivian had moved on, describing her villa in Naples, the spa in Bali, the week she spent on a yacht with a designer whose name she couldn't pronounce. Rachel returned to restock glasses at the service station, keeping her eyes low. She didn't see the manager approach the table. She didn't see the champagne tray or the envelope. She was just trying to make it to the end of her shift. The manager stepped forward calm, composed, carrying a silver tray and an envelope embossed with gold. At his side, quietly, was Rachel. She hadn't been told why. Vivian glanced up lazily, swirling her wine glass as if she had better things to do. The manager cleared his throat. "Ladies," he began, "a small token from the house, on behalf of our owner, Mr. Donovan." Vivian's brow lifted. Her fingers reached for the envelope, slow and certain. "Well," she said, almost laughing, "it's about time someone recognized exceptional patrons." She cast a smug glance at Rachel, who stood still, her eyes on the floor. But the manager didn't smile. And what he said next silenced the table. "This gesture comes directly from the owner," he repeated. "He's been observing your experience tonight, and he wanted to respond personally." Vivian's hand froze. "The owner," she echoed. At that moment the gray-suited man approached. Not rushed, not theatrical. He moved with the kind of silence that makes people turn, not from noise, but from gravity. The dining room grew still. Forks were lowered. Conversations died. And then, his voice. "Yes," the man said. "I'm the owner." He paused beside the table. "My name is Charles Donovan, and this is my restaurant." Vivian's smile cracked. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. "Oh, Mr. Donovan, I didn't realize." Charles didn't interrupt. He simply looked at her. Then turned and gestured to Rachel. "This young woman happens to be my niece." The words didn't shout, but they hit like thunder. "She's one of the hardest working people I've ever met," Charles continued, "and I take great pride in having her on my team." Vivian's cheeks flushed deep pink. Her friends stiffened. The giggles were gone. "I couldn't help but overhear how you spoke to her tonight," he added. "And while I understand that mistakes happen," he leaned in just slightly, his voice still low, but now undeniable, "I believe there's a way to handle them, with decency and with kindness." Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came, so one of her friends tried instead. "I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it," the woman whispered. "It just came out strong, maybe." Charles turned to her, then back to Vivian. "Perhaps not, but intent doesn't erase impact." His tone was even, but final. Words have weight, and when they're used carelessly, they can do harm that lingers far longer than a single evening. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the candles seemed to still. Charles continued. "Rachel," he said, turning gently toward her, "you carried yourself with grace tonight, even when you had every right to break." Rachel blinked, swallowed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I want you to know," he said softly, "I saw you. I'm proud of you." Vivian looked down. Her hand tightened around her napkin. Charles turned back to her. "Now as for you." The air tightened. "I could ask you not to return. I'd be within reason. But I think there's something more important here." He nodded to the tray the manager still held. This champagne was meant as a gesture of goodwill. He paused, but instead, I'll be donating its value and your entire tab tonight to a nonprofit that helps support young women like Rachel, women working towards something better. The gasp was small, the impact massive. Rachel's eyes widened, Vivian's jaw clenched, her pride, once firm and poised, now hung awkwardly between silence and shame. "Mr. Donovan," she said quickly, her voice cracking, "I think this is all a bit extreme. I didn't mean." Charles raised a hand. Not harsh, but with finality. "This isn't about punishment, Miss Cross. It's about accountability." His eyes didn't narrow. They softened. "And about asking ourselves, what kind of legacy do we leave behind in the small moments when no one has to be kind?" Across the room, diners nodded. Some leaned forward. Others wiped their eyes. But everyone heard it, everyone felt it. Not just the lesson, the reminder. Charles stepped back, just enough to speak to the entire room. "Let tonight remind us all," he said, "that kindness costs nothing, but can mean everything. You never know what someone is carrying." He glanced again at Rachel, or who might be watching. Not at first, but slowly, quietly it came, soft, steady, genuine. Rachel stood straighter. Her shoulders lifted, not because she was praised, but because as someone stood up for her. Charles turned to her one last time. "Take a short break," he said with a kind smile. "You've earned it." Rachel nodded. Her voice didn't come, but her eyes said everything. And then she disappeared behind the kitchen doors, her steps no longer trembling, her heart a little lighter. Vivian didn't stand right away. She stayed seated, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope she had never opened. Her plate sat untouched. The stem of her wine glass wobbled in her hand. Around her, the room moved on, sort of. Diners resumed their meals. The hum of conversation returned, but not fully. Not yet. Something lingered in the air, like the scent of rain long after the storm. Her friends were silent now. No more jokes. No more toasts. Just two women glancing nervously at their napkins, and at the woman who, moments ago, had commanded the whole dining room. Vivian Cross had always known how to control a room. But now the room had spoken back. At the rear of the restaurant, near the service station, Rachel leaned against the wall, her hands finally still. She closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but release. The weight hadn't just been the tray or the shift. It had been the voice in her head, the one that whispered, "You don't belong here. Don't mess this up." But now that voice was quieter. She didn't need applause. She didn't need to be anyone's niece. She just needed that moment, and it had come. The manager approached. "You okay?" he asked gently. Rachel nodded. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she said. "They noticed," he replied. "And not just Mr. Donovan." He smiled, then gave her shoulder a soft pat. "You did good." Back on the dining floor, Vivian finally stood. Not like before. No grand movement, no confident posture. Just a quiet rise. Her hand smoothed the front of her blazer, a reflex. But the usual sharpness in her eyes was gone. She didn't look at the diners. Didn't meet anyone's gaze. She didn't want to see their thoughts written on their faces. Not tonight. Not after that. Lindsay and Paige followed awkwardly. No one reached for the champagne bottle. No one spoke. At the door, Vivian paused. For the briefest second, she turned. She looked back at the room she used to own. At the server station. At the kitchen doors. She didn't see Rachel. But that wasn't the point. What she saw instead was space. A space she had once filled with noise, with presence, with performance. And now silence. Outside, the Charleston air had cooled. A breeze moved through the palms, brushing past the sidewalk like a sigh. Vivian stood still. Her friends murmured something about calling a car. She waved them off, said she needed a moment. But she didn't move. Her heels, once so confident, felt strangely heavy. It wasn't shame, not entirely. It was something more unfamiliar, stillness. Inside, Charles Donovan sat again at his table. He didn't look satisfied. He didn't look victorious. He simply sat, quietly. A waiter refilled his water. A couple walked past, offering a respectful nod. An older gentleman paused near his table and whispered, "That was something rare, sir." "Something good." Charles only nodded. "It wasn't about standing up," he said. "It was about reminding." In the kitchen, Rachel returned to her post. Not because anyone asked, but because she wanted to. She picked up a tray, checked her section, pulled herself into motion, not to escape, but to move forward. A few customers smiled as she passed. One woman even whispered, "You handled that beautifully." Rachel just smiled back. No need for speeches, no need for acknowledgement. Sometimes strength is quiet. In a corner booth, a young couple folded their napkins and stood. The man leaned in toward his partner. "Should we leave a bigger tip?" She nodded. No hesitation. Another man, in his 70s, slipped a folded bill into his check holder and wrote a single line beside it, "For the people who keep the lights on." Near the bar, the manager adjusted the seating chart for the next wave of reservations. He paused, looked out over the room. Nothing looked different. But everything felt different. At the entrance, Vivian finally turned away from the building. She didn't look back again. Her car arrived. As she opened the door, she caught her reflection in the window, hair still flawless, makeup intact. But her eyes were tired. Not from the day. From the mirror being held up in front of her. From seeing what she hadn't wanted to see. Sometimes, the world doesn't need to raise its voice to change you. Sometimes it just needs to pause long enough for you to hear the silence you've been ignoring. The night ended, not with applause, not with drama, but with something softer. Something you almost missed, unless you were listening for it. The last guests drifted out of the Briar and Finch, voices low, movements slower than when they'd arrived. The clatter of plates had faded, the hum of conversation dimmed, but a stillness remained, not empty. Full. In the back hallway near the kitchen, Rachel leaned against the exit door, eyes closed for just a moment. The night's weight had lifted, but something new took its place. She didn't feel like the same girl who dropped off that steak 3 hours ago. And she wasn't. Not because of who stood up for her, but because of what it reminded her. That dignity is never handed to you, you carry it. Even when others try to tear it from your hands. The manager walked by, about to lock up for the night. "You heading out?" he asked. Rachel opened her eyes, smiled faintly. "In a bit." He nodded. "You want company?" She shook her head. "No, I'm good." In the dining room, Charles Donovan collected a stray napkin left behind. It was the kind of thing a busboy might do. But tonight it felt right. He glanced toward the door where his niece had gone. And he smiled. Not proud, not relieved, just quietly at peace. Because what needed to be said had been said, and what needed to be heard had been heard. Across town, in a townhouse with tall windows and polished floors, Vivian Cross sat alone on the edge of her bed. Still dressed, still silent. Her heels sat untouched near the door. The envelope from the restaurant rested on her nightstand. She hadn't opened it. She didn't know why she took it with her. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because something inside her wasn't ready to let go of the night. She stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room. Same woman. Same face. But tonight it looked back at her differently. Not with judgment. With question. "Who have you become?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But the question was enough. Meanwhile, Rachel exited through the side alley, her apron slung over one shoulder, the cool air brushing against her arms. She walked with a different rhythm now. Not hurried. Not tense. Balanced. She passed a group of diners still chatting near the corner. One woman caught her eye and smiled. Rachel smiled back and kept walking. Not every night changes the world. But some nights change people. And that's enough. Because when one person chooses kindness, chooses to speak up, chooses to see what others ignore, it ripples. Like soft applause in a quiet room. Like the last light before a restaurant closes. Like a young woman walking taller than before. There's a moment in every person's life when the world doesn't hand you a lesson. It shows you one. Vivian Cross didn't leave the Briar and Finch as a villain. She left as someone finally quiet enough to hear the echo of her own words. And Rachel, she didn't leave a hero. She left something even rarer, with her dignity intact. Because sometimes, life doesn't test your strength in big battles. It tests it in small humiliations. In the way you carry a tray, or choose not to break when someone tries to make you feel small. And the people who walk away with real power are the ones who didn't need to humiliate someone else to feel tall. respect. It costs nothing. But when you give it freely and you protect it boldly, you leave behind something money could never buy. A legacy. If this story stays with you, even just a little, then pass it on. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's true in the way that matters most, emotionally, quietly, lastingly. And if you want more stories like this, stories that speak in silences, that leave you feeling something after the screen fades, you're warmly invited. Subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with us for the next quiet story that just might change someone's day. We'll be here, waiting.